If you end up doing this as long as I have, chances are you're going to end up with a laundry list of embarrassing moments. I sure have mine, and I picked out 3 from that list that I'm going to share with you today. Each of them taught me something really valuable. I'm Mike Quackenbush, this is Till We Make It, and I have been fortunate throughout the decades to work in front of the camera as a professional wrestler, ring announcer, commentator, and referee. And I've worked behind the scenes too, as a promoter, booker, agent, coach, and consultant. And along the way, I've had to learn a lot of hard lessons. They've left me with a wide array of embarrassing moments. And I want to talk about just 3 of these embarrassing moments. That's all the more I can bear today. And I want to share with you the lesson that each one imparted to me. Each of these stories I've picked out for you today hails from roughly the same period of my career, when I had been in about 5 to 6 years. So I'm just a little bit outside of my apprentice phase. I'm starting to travel, I'm starting to build up my professional network, I'm starting to be able to demand a higher price for my services, and I'm trying desperately to prove that I can be a consistent in-ring performer. Although, at this stage, I don't know if I was even fooling myself. So the first of these stories I want to share with you, it takes place in my hometown. I grew up in a tiny borough of Reading, PA called West Lawn, and I used to wrestle in my hometown of Reading for a great promoter named Blaine DeSantis and his Pennsylvania Championship Wrestling. It was probably the most important break I received back in that period of my career. Just having the chance to be associated with one of the top East Coast independent organizations was huge. And on this auspicious occasion, wrestling at the Cloister at St. Joe's, I happened to be rematched against one of my best opponents at that time, the Reckless Youth, Tom Carter. Our last match for Blaine had been so well received, we were put back together once again, and now it was in my hometown. A couple guys I knew from the comic shop were coming. My buddy Jeff was coming to see the match, so the pressure was really on. For reasons unknown to me even to this day, in the middle of the match, I decided that what I would do was place my opponent as far across the ring as I possibly could, and then scale the opposing turnbuckle to attempt a flying headbutt, a move which I had never done before. And I just thought, well, how hard could this possibly be? I'm going to jump as hard as I possibly can, stick my head out, and there it'll be, the flying headbutt. And, as you've probably already deduced, that is not at all how this went. What ended up happening was, I had placed Reckless Youth too far away from the turnbuckle, and I jumped as far as I possibly could and landed about 2 feet short of my destination. But because I had so much forward momentum, I ended up sliding on the canvas on my forehead and nose like a battering ram right into Reckless Youth's shoulder. Reckless Youth's shoulder. That's where I ended up, hitting Reckless Youth's shoulder. That's tougher to say than you think. My pal Jeff would go on to call this the flying skidding headbutt, and no matter what you call it, it was embarrassing. Even though this is from an era when ECW had given permission to all wrestling fans to loudly and sometimes rudely razz wrestlers who botched things in the ring, the only thing we were really met with was laughter. And that was unbelievably embarrassing. It did teach me this valuable lesson, though. Anything that's going to be put on stage in front of the paying customers, it needs to be rehearsed to a safe perfection. To just decide on the fly to try something like that without having practiced it is really quite dangerous. I could have hurt myself, I could have hurt my opponent, and we made an embarrassment of ourselves. I can only imagine what the promoter, Blaine DeSantis, must have been feeling watching that, as he was the one commentating the match. And no matter what I was paid at the end of the night, on that occasion, it was too much. From that point on, I brought an almost tedious perfectionism to every move I would do in the ring. It was no longer enough to just master the broad strokes. No, even the details had to be polished. And thinking back more than 10 years now to Maybe the clip of mine that's been watched more than any other in the course of my career, back when Cesaro still had some of his luscious brown locks. That snippet contains movements and techniques that were rehearsed hundreds of times before we ever dared to try them live in the ring in front of an audience. The next somewhat embarrassing story I want to share with you hails from the very next summer, but before I move on, I do want to ask, if you're passionate about professional wrestling and you're never done learning all about it, won't you please consider subscribing to the channel down below? That way you never miss out. And if you'd like even more of the educational multimedia I produce for fellow pro wrestlers, consider joining me over on Patreon. That's where you'll find exclusive videos, book excerpts, essays that I've written, podcasts, and unreleased material that you won't see anywhere else. A link to it is down below. This next story takes place nowhere near my hometown of Reading, PA. It's from all the way down in Lufkin, Texas. And it features what I happen to think is the absolute worst match of my entire career. Now, this was the first company that ever hired me and bought me a plane ticket to come work for them all the way down in Texas. In addition to which, it was the first organization to ever book me at my full rate. So they didn't try to negotiate my price down. They didn't ask me to work at a reduced rate. They were willing to take the first number that I threw out and agreed to pay that. So when you add these things together, especially given where I was at 5-6 years into my career at this point in time, boy, did I feel a lot of pressure. Not only did I have to deliver every time I went to work for these people, I had to over-deliver to prove that I was worth the investment that they were making. So every single time I went down to Texas to work for these people, it was my mission to make sure that my match stole the show. Unfortunately, on this particular evening, despite that self-imposed pressure to over-deliver, there was simply no chance my match was going to steal the show. On this sweaty summer night in Texas, we happened to be wrestling in a gigantic gymnasium. And at that point in the tag team match, where the hot tag finally came my way, I jumped into the ring like a ball of fire and watched as my two opponents powdered out of the ring and ran to the extreme far ends of the gymnasium. And in that moment, I froze. And then I turned and looked at my partner, who said, "Go get one of them," as if it would just be that easy. Go get one of them. And I tried. I slid out of the ring and chased one of them as fast as I could, and I could quite legitimately not catch him. Now, eventually, my tag partner and I were able to corner one of them and actually get back into the ring. But by the time all of that had taken place, this entire Benny Hill / monkeys romp around the gymnasium, the match was no longer professional wrestling. It had degenerated into some kind of farce. And the smartest thing to do in that moment would have been to just go home. Sort everything else out in the back, but put this thing out of its misery. However, that is not what we chose to do in that moment. We attempted to get everything in and fight to get the audience back, even though it was clear with each subsequent move that we did that it was drifting further and further into anticlimax. The longer we stayed, the worse the reaction got. So the truth of the matter is, that poor audience should have only been subjected to watching us wrestle for 3 more seconds, and then we should have exited stage right with our tails between our legs for that deplorable performance. But our pride dictated that we try to soldier on, even though it was clear the audience was having none of it. I was utterly mortified to face the people in charge upon walking back through the curtain. In addition to which, I had to come to terms with this hard lesson that match taught me. Sometimes you have to swallow your pride and just go home. When a match jumps the rails in a way that it cannot recover from, or the audience is no longer invested and it seems impossible to get them back, yes, you can make the decision to go out there and try and fight, maybe to the detriment of the entire show, in order to get the audience back, when the best thing to do for the show at large would be to just go home and then get off stage as fast as possible. The last of these humbling tales that I'm going to share with you today comes from the very end of my 6th year in wrestling, when I was given a wonderful gift. The opportunity to wrestle who was then the most famous luchador active anywhere on planet Earth, the son of El Santo, El Hijo del Santo, in April of 2000 for the Future Wrestling Alliance. Heading into this match, I actually thought that I was qualified to wrestle El Hijo del Santo, because I had taken years of Spanish in high school and in college. I'd wrestled other luchadors like Rey Mysterio Sr., and if anybody on the promotion's roster, I felt like no one understood Lucha Libre better than I did. Once I got into the ring, what followed was a 15-minute wrestling lesson I will never forget for the rest of my life. I have never felt so hopelessly outclassed by another wrestler as I did on that particular day. And before the match is even over, if you are ever so unfortunate as to watch it back, you can see it in my eyes. I am ashamed of myself. Before the day of that match arrived, I thought the greatest gift I could be given was the opportunity to share the ring with El Hijo del Santo. But after the fact, I came to appreciate that the actual gift was the lesson I learned that day and how it would impact the rest of my career up to and including this project till we make it. The lesson I learned is this. In professional wrestling, there is always someone who knows more than you do, and it's your job as a professional to constantly find that person and learn whatever you can from them. And after you learn as much from that person as you possibly can, well, remember, there's always somebody out there who knows more than you do. And what's your job? To seek them out and learn whatever you possibly can from them. And when I came to truly embrace that lesson, it's in that moment that the idea you could one day finish training became completely laughable to me. Since that match, I have never been content with the amount of knowledge I have about professional wrestling. For every new thing that I learn, there's 100 other things waiting for me to learn. And that has informed the entire rest of my career in the 20+ years since that match happened. I don't recount any of these stories because I'm proud to tell them. It's really quite the opposite. Each one is a moment in which I felt embarrassment or humiliation, and that was brought on by my own ignorance, hubris, or arrogance. The reason that I am choosing to share these with you is this. I hope that if at some point you should ever come across a pitfall similar in nature on your path to future success, that having heard these tales of woe, you will be able to avoid the exact kinds of failures and foibles I always fell victim to. I am a little curious to know, did one of these particularly resonate with you? Like the tale of the flying, skidding headbutt, or the misadventure of that tag match in Lufkin, Texas? Maybe it was the inescapable truth that there is always someone out there who knows more than you do. Let me know which down below in the comments. And if you feel like you need to continue on your path of learning right now, well, not to worry. There's another video right over here. And though, yes, this video is now at an end, the learning need not be.